are kind of closed-minded on these issues. You have always struck me as more open-minded about, the possibility that, for example, we don't know everything there is to know
Oh yeah,
about
that's
about cognition and our
yeah.
By far.
mental abilities.
And that's the way I was trained, is that, you can't ever, you have to ask questions, but we don't know what we don't know. And that's just the way it is. And we have
Yes.
to wait, hopefully find out what we don't know.
And
Or
we
at
don't,
least that's the question.
right. And we can't find out what we don't know if we assume we know more than we know,
Yeah, there are people that, yeah, some people get very stubborn about it and they say, this is the way it is. That's the diagnosis or whatever. And they close the door. And very often, I shouldn't say very often, but patients get in trouble that way. And it's not good from a diagnostic perspective in terms of the physician is constantly learning, in my opinion. You have to learn from day one to the end of your days, that you're constantly learning.
You're a psychiatrist or a neurologist?
I'm an internist.
Internist. Oh, sorry, I went
I
on
have
a
a
different path.
master's degree in psychology, child psychology, actually. Initially, I wanted to be a psychologist. I like people. I'm very, very curious about what makes people tick.
Yeah.
And I was home from college I guess my sophomore year, and I guess I got a cold or a sore throat or something, and we called our family. My mother called our family doctor, and who always made house calls. He was an old friend of the family, a German refugee, Dr. Meyerstein, who spoke with a very heavy German accent and was very funny. Anyway, he asked me what I was majoring in college, and I told him psychology. And he said, psychology? He said, that's nice, but you need to go into psychiatry with a very, Then he said, you can treat people with the whole picture. It's not, you can give them medicine, you can do everything as a psychiatrist, but as a psychologist, all you can do is talk. And it made sense to me. So I changed my major from psychology to pre-med, and the rest is history.
And how
Then
did
you ended up becoming an internist. Yeah. How did you end up?
I had a rotating internship, these are no longer available. Idiots did away with it. It's after you graduate from medical school, you could choose a specialty, like I want to be a surgeon. So you go into a surgical residency or whatever it is. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I liked everything. And in those days, you could have a rotating internship, meaning you spent 3 weeks on surgery, 3 weeks on pediatrics, 3 weeks on OBGYN, 3 weeks on internal medicine, et cetera, to help you focus on what sort of patients you're actually going to see in real life in that setting. And I just thought it was important because, and I mentor in medical school, who's a neurologist, told me, he said, look, you have to remember the head bone and the foot bone are all attached, including the heart bone. And you can't go into medicine and assume that just because you're going to be this specialty or that specialty, that's all you need to know. It's all related. And it made very good sense to me. And that's why I did a rotating internship, because I wanted to know a little bit of something about everything. And internal medicine, then I chose, I was fortunate enough to get my rotating hospital. I went to the University of Louisville, but in terms of after I graduated, I applied to places in Massachusetts, where my family is mostly from, and I had my rotating internship at Cambridge Hospital in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is a Harvard hospital, and from there, I was actually invited to go to Mass General and do my first year of formal internal medicine residency there. And at the point they said, "What do you want to do?" This is the doctor from Mass General. And I said, "Well, I really want to be a family practitioner." He says, "Oh," and he kind of took his hands and put it on my head and moved it up and down and said, "You mean internal medicine, don't you?" They didn't do family doctors didn't exist at Mass General. There was all specialty related. It's the way they saw things. So I said, "Oh yes, oh yes."
That is what I mean.
And then I went from Mass General and finished my residency there, and also did my last year of residency I did at Boston City Hospital on the Harvard service at Boston City Hospital, which no longer exists. It's I think Tufts took it all over. And so I think I was in one of the last classes that had that Harvard rotation, the Harvard unit at Boston City Hospital, which is a big city hospital, and you see all sorts of people. And that to me was the best thing. That you can't just go to places like Mass General, where the people who go there are usually a little more financially established, let me put it that way. Whereas Boston City is a little bit more, everybody goes there, and you get a much wider view of the populace and what it's like, and you learn a little bit more about how people are able to survive and thrive and how they approach life and things like that. And
So did that experience, clearly you're after trying to understand not just certain people, but everyone, right?
yeah,
Is that kind of orientation what made you let me ask the question differently. What what provided to you the motivation to go into intelligence?
well, I got an issue of JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, and in the back of it there was an ad and said CIA needs doctors. This was in like 1972. And Vietnam was roaring along. I had already been to the Boston Navy Yard and had my pre-induction physical because I expected to be drafted the minute I finished my residency. And I looked at this ad, the CIA needs doctors, and I couldn't believe. I said, "Why does the CIA need doctors?" It was just a shock to me that they even would, it's kind of like, why would those dirty guys have doctors on their staff? That was the sort of the mentality at that point in my life, and I think at that point in time. And I put the ad on the top of my dresser and sat there for a couple of months. And then finally, my curiosity got the best of me. And I applied. I wrote a letter. I'm interested, and I applied. I said, "I want to find out what these guys are all about. What's going on here?" And I was invited to an office in Boston for a preliminary interview. And the person who interviewed me said, "Yeah, we have people like you come here all the time." He said, "Because I have to tell you, the agency attracts a lot of nuts to apply. And we got to check you out and make sure you're not crazy, a nut." And I guess I wasn't, because after that, they invited me to Washington. And I went through the whole process in Washington there. And I was actually very impressed with the medical service there. They were upfront, they were honest. They told me what they did and what they didn't do and what I could expect. And I was very impressed. Plus, I had always wanted to go overseas. My father, who was an entomologist and plant pathologist, got his PhD from Cornell in 1934. So what do you do in 1934 with a PhD in entomology? It's depression, there's no jobs. But I don't know how it happened, but he had a job in Brazil offered to him. Evidently, the governor of the state of Pernambuco had a daughter and the daughter was married, and the governor had made the daughter's husband the head of an agricultural college in Recife, state of Pernambuco. And this guy didn't know anything about anything regarding doing that sort of stuff. And they kind of figured, I don't know how or who or what, hey, let's get a non-Brazilian in here to help him out. That way there's no political political blowback. And so my father was offered the job to go to Pernambuco, to Recife, and work at the agricultural college there, basically advising the governor's son-in-law. And
So you wanted to follow his tracks and travel overseas?
It was the highlight of his life.
Uh,
He was there several years. He dated the governor's daughters. I mean, he's a farm boy. He grew up on a chicken farm in Massachusetts, which is still in the family. And that's all. He didn't want. He's a farm boy. That's what he knew. But suddenly, he's swinging with all these embassy people, ambassadors, and the governor and the governor's daughter. And it was like, oh boy. And he said this is the best time of his life, except what happened in Brazil in the mid-30s. The Nazis moved into Brazil. And he had his life threatened. And he decided, you know what, this is nuts. So he was there for like 3 years. And suddenly, one guy evidently threatened him and said, look, if you don't go back to the States, we don't want Americans here, we're going to kill you. And my father decided, why not? I'm going to go back. So his contract terminated, or he didn't renew his contract, and he came back to the United States.
Well, so with that history, weren't you a little also excited, but also scared to go? I mean, if it were me, I'd be both excited and
I
scared.
really wasn't, because he was an amateur photographer and took 8mm movies, which I still have all of them. And he took trips up the Amazon River.
Wow.
And he filmed all this.
Wow.
And while he was there, he discovered insects that no one had known before, and he submitted them. And so our family is proudly we had our name added to several insects. There's one called Metapedia pyensoni out there. And another couple of insects. I mean, what family can say, yeah, we have bugs named after us,
Yeah. So when you started at CIA, were you just like a kind of a doctor providing medical
I was
services
hired by
to
the
CIA employees?
by the medical office, and the idea was I would be in the headquarters area for a year, learning the ropes, as it was told. Learning the ropes. Anyway, we arrived in July of '73. All of a sudden, about a week and a half later, I was called in and said, medical director said, we're going to send you to Germany. Maybe I shouldn't have said Germany, the place, but we're going to send you to Europe. And that was great, because my wife happened to be a language teacher. She speaks fluent German, Norwegian, Danish, whatever, those languages. And she had done her junior year abroad in Germany. She had friends there. So it was like, wow, perfect. And we had a young daughter at that point in time. And great, when? He said, as soon as you get your passports. So I was employed by the agency for a total of about 3 weeks. And it took us a couple of weeks to get our passports and everything else. And after 6 weeks of employment, we ended up in Germany. And there we were, 6 weeks. I said, what do I do there? And he said, you'll find out when you get there. That was the words that the guy, my boss at that point said, you'll find out when you get there. Turns out I was the regional medical officer for all of Europe.
Oh, wow.
And I traveled from Finland down to Malta on a regular basis, seeing all sorts of people, employees, foreign people that were of interest, defectors, which were actually some of the more interesting people that I was responsible for seeing. And
People who defected from Russia?
some right from all, yeah, all over. At one point, my first sort of different sort of thing was sneaking under the Berlin Wall with somebody to see an asset. And I was kind of like, if I nowadays, if I know, I said, why was I stupid to, sneaking into East Germany? And I was young, and all I could see was pictures of, it just, I was gung
You were
ho.
heroic. You
No
were
one's going to
heroic.
do anything
Yeah,
to me.
right, right.
I'll show them, I'm going to do this, etc. I was very adventure oriented. And I did that. I mean, I used to see people covertly like that all the time. And I guess I found the job intellectually challenging, but it was also, kind of sounds immature, fun to me.
Yes, right.
This
Fun,
is
fun.
fun. This is
Right.
great. I
Right.
loved it.
yes.
Did
Fun
you
and-
feel, oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say fun and not dark. A lot of people, I think, who don't know anything about CIA assume that there's this dark, foreboding, evil energy there that, infuses everything we do, which is not the case.
Yeah, no, I asked him when in Washington, I was interviewing with the medical director, and I said, look, you guys don't give medicine to people to kill them and stuff like that, do you? He said, of course not. Of course not. We take care of people. We take care of anybody. It's not our business. And so
Wait, I have a question about that though, because
Sure.
I'm more from the outside and I come from a world in which absolutely people still have this idea of CIA. So, I'm thinking, okay, we're going to be talking with, one of the most active doctors in CIA, national security. The first thing that I would imagine coming up among my cohort of people who are kind of paranoid, um, I'll give them that, is that, oh, well, so was he involved in MK Ultra, which is a dark chapter in the history of CIA.
sorry, could you repeat that? It didn't.
Oh, the question of, oh, was he involved in MK Ultra, which was before your time. I mean, it sort of ended, I believe, in the late 60s, but nonetheless, that would be the question, right? And so
Yeah.
this feeling that there's this dark foreboding things that are going on with CIA, they don't come from nowhere, right? Like there's this history
I
there.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was only early on in the tour, the only thing I was asked that might have been questionable was an agency officer came to me and said, look, can you give me something, a medication that I can give to somebody that's going to put them to sleep so I can go and sneak into their apartment? And I said, no, I can't do that. I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know if it's good. Whatever I give you is warranted for that reason. And whether any side effects from it, I'm going to cause him harm, and I'm not going to do it. I sent a message back to Washington about it, and they said, you are absolutely right.
Exactly. So this guy, or I assume it was a guy at the time,
I told him, no, I said, that's not, you don't want to do that. You have to find some, that's just not the right, that's just not. And that was the only time I was ever asked to do something that I thought was a little bit wrong.
right.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, I think,
And luckily,
mean,
and
one
that
of
was
the,
early on in my tour. And after that, I never known people I said, I will take care. I told them, I will take care of anybody. If you have a patient, I will see them, but I'm not going to do anything to harm them. And that was it. And
So let's
Yeah.
just jump forward a few years. How did you come to be involved in trying to remember what it was called, the medical assessment
Medical Analysis Center.
The medical analysis unit.
Yeah.
Was it
Well,
already existing?
yes, yes,
And did you know people like Terry Bush?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So just tell
Yeah,
us about that.
the agency was involved in medical analysis of people that they were interested in. Oh, it started in late like 1965 or something like that.
These are non-American people, or are these potential recruits to CIA?
No. These are all foreign,
Yeah.
all foreign. And I got back. I went overseas in '73. Immediately shot overseas, and I did not come back to the United States for 5 years. I had
Wow.
a tour in Europe and a tour elsewhere in a facility that I shouldn't talk about. But it involved a lot of interesting stuff. And after 5 years, 1989, I came back to the United States. And shortly thereafter, I was offered a job in the DI. I don't
That's
know
the
what.
Directorate of
the
Intelligence.
analytic directorate, yes.
Pardon me? And
I'm just explaining the acronym, the analytic
Directorate of
directorate.
Intelligence, where they
Right.
do analysis. I'm sorry. And now I don't know why they were, the medical office I found to be very competitive. And managing doctors, they usually say it's like herding cats. It's very hard to do. Most doctors are relatively independent. They don't like being told what to do, etc. And the medical office was like that in spades. And that may be why I was recommended to go into the intelligence directorate to get rid of me out of the medical office, because I was a troublemaker in their opinion. I asked too many questions. And again, for me, I had never been at headquarters. I was, at headquarters for a couple of weeks, and then I've been overseas for 5 years. I had no idea what headquarters or anything about the agency. But I went into the DI, and there was a medical unit there at that point in time, founded by a fellow named Miles Maxfield.
Oh, I remember him. He was a lovely man.
Yeah, and then someone else took over, and they needed somebody else there to do some work. They were busy, and it was just medical at that point in time, just the medical stuff. And
By which you mean not psychiatric?
no, that was a separate unit.
Yeah.
It was a separate unit. And so
What was the purpose to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to track from the outside world.
Yeah, the purpose was to look at the health, mostly of world leaders or other persons of interest to the United States, to help our government understand how do you negotiate with them, what's the likelihood of them remaining in office for how long.
Right, so it's like, is Putin dying or not, kind of questions.
Yeah, there, and or are there things we could do if they're sick to help them? And we used to do a lot of that. And I found it very intriguing. It was kind of, wow, this is really neat stuff. The other aspect of it was, overseas, you can lay your hands on people, on patients, and see them actually. But when you're not there, you have to do it remotely. And I had always prided myself on being very good at diagnosing somebody just by looking at them. How do you walk? How do you talk? How are you dressed, etc.? Is everything symmetric? What's just looking at them in terms of their body and their face and everything. And very often it's surprising that they reveal themselves in terms of what's going on with them, if there is anything, at least from a medical and certainly from a psychological perspective, which I did not do at that initial point. And I luckily was able to do some very good things in that regard. And the doctor who was running the clinic retired, and I was made the chief of the medical unit. And then I'm not sure of the total reasoning behind, well, I do know the reasoning behind it. There used to be an Office of Leadership Analysis there.
Yes, right.
A big office. And it turned out, as it was explained to me, I think it's true, that that office did more of that was the most requested documents from policymakers than any of the other regional offices combined. And so what happened was that the head of the Director of Intelligence at the time decided, we're going to, the other units are going out of business if somebody finds out that the Office of Leadership Analysis is doing most of the work in that sense. So they did away with the Office of Leadership Analysis, and they put the people who were doing that into the geographical parts of the DI that cover different geographical areas, and they just sort of immersed them within those units. And what they did with us was they didn't know what to do with us because we covered the whole world. So where did we end up? I ended up on the 7th floor where the PDB was generated.
That's how we got to know each other most directly.
The President's Daily Brief. So I sat right up on the 7th floor, and I was right there so that I knew everything that the President wanted to know. And if I could contribute to that, we did. And I think we contributed more stuff for the PDB than just about anybody, because our politicians want to know what's making so-and-so tick. How do I deal with this guy? And luckily, we could usually give them a reasonable answer that made sense. And
I don't know, Les, if you saw the conversation we just posted with Tim Papa.
Yeah,
who's
just
an
what I was thinking.
FBI behavioral analyst, but there's
I didn't
there's a
see
part where he talks about, I think it's actually the last snippet that we posted on LinkedIn, where he talks about how he approached understanding decision makers, and he wanted to know who they loved, whom they hated, who they talked to. And that kind of information is what our policymakers, who are, after all, first and foremost politicians, want to know about foreign leaders.
Yeah, that's about right. That's very right. Yeah, they want
and the dynamics of how that changes. Yeah.
You know, who are they friends, and that help who are they friends with helps tell them what motivates them, because these people tend to get together with each other.
Right.
And so you really loved that work. You really love that work in particular, right?
To me, even though I think some people in the medical office put me there to get rid of me, I had no idea this was going on when I was initially, 5 years overseas. I didn't know anything other than taking care of people they asked me to take care of. And when I got back to the office, and really very quickly thereafter, I was wished into the intelligence directorate, and it was great. I thought this was the best thing since, I don't know what. It was, here you can do something, you can write something. One of the things I made it a point, whether I was in medical school and thereafter, was to be able to become a diagnostician. You look at somebody before you even examine them. How do they, you open the door, say hello to them. How do they respond? How are they dressed? How do they look? Are they comfortable, uncomfortable? Do they have tremors? All sorts of stuff you can tell about people just by looking at them and their behavior. And I thought I was pretty good at it. And so it just played to my interests as well. And then what happened?
Yeah, go ahead. Just keep going.
Then what happened is I started going to, I realized the best way you're going to get good information, because people will report, oh, I saw so-and-so and he didn't look good. And I said, well, what do you mean? Yeah, and
Yeah.
you have to, it's like asking me something about a subject I know nothing about, and I can try to make something up. It, well, this didn't look right, you know, whatever. And but I realized that one thing you can do, aside from the reports you get from the field, which are not always accurate, you know, they give their opinion about it, but that doesn't mean anything, because they're not trained in that. That's not their business. They'll report rumors, or I think that's what's going on, or my mother had this and this is the way this person looks. And so I made it a point in Washington that any time I could get in the vicinity of leaders, foreign leaders, I would do that. And that for me mostly went going to UN meetings every year. So I got invited every year to UN General Assembly meetings and whatever. And I used to roam the halls and look at people and shake their hands and everything else. Even a handshake tells you a lot too. And that's when I met Boris Yeltsin at one of these meetings. And I shook hands with him, like putting my big guys, like putting my hand in a catcher's mitt. Unbelievable. And he was drunk. The whole, I mean, he was just all over the place, drunk. He was manhandling women. I mean, just all sorts of stuff. And I wrote back and I said, look, Boris Yeltsin has heart failure. His legs are swollen, his hands are swollen. Aside from being an alcoholic, he's got heart failure. Maybe we can help him. And that's where the medical diplomacy part of it comes into it. So people said, I said, why don't we get his doctor over here, and we can get him set up with Dr. DeBakey in Texas, one of the world's experts on heart surgery and bypass surgery and stuff like that. And he sent his doctor over. DeBakey went over there. They did bypass surgery on him, and he never gave up his alcohol, but he lived another 5 or 6 years anyway. And relations with the United States during that period in the 90s, late 90s, was excellent, really good. And so I thought, this is where I can really make a difference. And that's kind of, my grandfather used to always tell me, whatever you do, make sure you love it and do something that's going to make a difference.
I love this.
Anyway,
that's beautiful.
And that was sort
exciting.
of the first person I saw. And then one of the other things we had is Yasser Arafat was coming to the United States, and the State Department had a message that said, look, could one of your doctors just kind of follow him around? And State said, our doctors are not allowed to take care of foreigners, but agency doctors are. So I got a phone call saying, how'd you like to take care of Yasser Arafat? This is in 93. Oh. And I said, sure. And for the next, until I retired in 2003, I was his doctor. Not in a major sense, but if he came to the United States, I was there. I would travel over to Gaza and the West Bank to see him, chat with him, find out how he's doing, find out if, from a medical perspective, if there's something we can do for him, etc. And I did that until the day I retired in 2003. Unfortunately, 3 years after that, he passed away. He
dies, yeah.
So I could say, it wasn't my fault. My job was to keep him alive. And that's all I wanted to do, is alive and happy.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to see how he interacted with different people when he was speaking in the United States with a whole group of Arab speakers who were very charismatic. I mean, he was a short, kind of not particularly good-looking guy, but he smiled, and the people, he had charisma. I don't know what charisma is in terms of how you can, he had it. And the same, I got to know King Hussein and Queen Noor the same way. And they all had charisma. They were very nice. King Hussein and Queen Noor especially were really good people. And other world leaders too. I mean,
This is so fascinating.
and to me, it was like, wow. And the good part of it is I could relay honest information back, not because 7 different people down the road said this is what's going on, but because I saw it myself. And so I knew I could at least vouch for what was being said and what I thought was going on with some credibility, I thought. And it
I
worked
have
very
a
well.
I have a question for you because
Sure.
my sense is you're here. It's like we're sitting with a human who has taken the Hippocratic Oath to the extreme in a beautiful way, right? You're saying like, I don't care who it is. My job is to take care of this person.
That's
And,
exactly my philosophy.
and that's beautiful. And there's another piece of you that's beautiful, which is your capacity to diagnose not just physical but mental stuff, like what's going on with a person, what a person's motivations are, etc. And I'm curious if you understand, and maybe you don't understand, but I wonder if you have any insight into why you're so good at that. I mean, clearly you're a good observer, but is it an intuitive or an analytical or both kind
I
of
think it's both.
capacity?
I've always been interested in people. That's why I was a psychology major in college until my head was twisted, and my family doctor got a hold of me. But always interested, why is somebody doing this? Why do people, why does he not like that person, but he likes this person, etc. And it just always intrigued me as to what made people tick. And that ultimately allowed me to want to go to medical school, which I hadn't really thought about, but that's another story. I can even tell you another story. Feel
So you think it's both intuitive and
yeah,
analytical because you're good at it. I mean, you're extremely good at it. And you also have the urge for healing. So you're
yeah.
not just
Well,
watching from a distance, you're sort of watching
initially,
from a distance, then
yeah,
seeing what you can
people
do.
had suggested go to medical school, and it scared, medical school kind of scared me when I was younger. My God, you got to be so smart to go to medical school. It's hard work. It's 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and 4 years of residency, etc. And I said, 12 years. My gosh. And it just scared me until, again, life event changed my mind. Again, I used to spend, my father used to spend, we used to spend our summers, the month of August, on the family farm in Massachusetts, Oakley Farm. And I would collect eggs and do, I would work when I was there. And I liked it. My grandfather was a great guy. Anyway, one year, my father decided he was going to rewrite one of his textbooks with a colleague at who happened to come from Massachusetts also, and they were going to spend their summer, the month of August, together rewriting one of my father's books. It happened to be on Cape Cod in Carver, Massachusetts. So we went. My father rented a cottage on a lake, and that's where I spent that month. Where I met a girl, and she was a very nice person. I don't want to name any names, but very nice, and we got along together. And I was about 14, and we started corresponding with each other. We corresponded until one August, and I was about 18, 19. I think I was a freshman, sophomore in college. My parents came to me one day in August and said, "Oh, you have to read this in the Boston Eagle." And it happened to be about the girl that I had been corresponding with. She had been in a plane crash, private plane, and they had come in too low at the airport on the Cape, and the wheels of this Piper Cub or whatever it was caught the telephone wires, and the plane flipped over, and that was it. And she died. And I was just kind of like beside myself. And then, and here's, you get thinking all sorts of things. Well, if I was there, I would have saved, I would have done something about it. And suddenly it clicked in my head, and I said, you know what? I'm going to change my major. And I'm from psychology to pre-med. And I did. And that's what kind of stimulated me to go to medical school. So something good came about from a bad event. And again, medical school kind of intimidated me initially, but when I got there, it was fun. It was very interesting, and I loved it.
So we're approaching the 1 hour mark. It's my official job in these things is to be the time tracker. But I have a question. Well, I have a comment and a question. So toward the end of my time up at the PDB staff, you invited me at least twice to come to one of your annual conferences.
Yes.
Where the doctors would get together and watch video. At that point, video was becoming much more freely available, and watch videos of foreign leaders in whatever setting you could have a video of. And then I would hear all the doctors talking about, oh, look at that hand is trembling there, or look at how he grabbed the handrail there, and sort of make diagnosis based on that. And I love that because I found it was a much more honest analytic approach than the approach that other analysts took. So that's my comment. And then my question is, do you have any favorite sort of stories about tells that the video gave you that were, really remarkable? Something, you don't have to name the person, but you just saw something in a video and you went, oh, I wonder if.
Yeah, and I want to know what my tell is.
I'm trying to think, I saw so many leaders, and well, Yeltsin, that I just spoke about, was the biggie that you could diagnose from a mile over, 100 miles away, you could diagnose him. And who else? I mean, there's so many others. Off the top of my head, I didn't have a favorite, to be honest with you, but I just, it doesn't pop into my head at this point in time, but there were a lot of them that I had seen them, and I just knew what was going on with them based on looking at them. And mostly, more important than that was actually the UN meetings and going up and shaking hands with them.
Right.
That told me more than anything. It was looking them in the eye and just kind of watch how they behave, watch how they interact with other people.
How they balance themselves and how they shake your hand and what their hand feels like. Is it warm? Is it cold?
Yes, absolutely. There's the all sorts of different
kind of live.
And you can tell how sincere they are, or whether they grab their hand and want to, and you can tell a lot from a handshake.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing about everybody. You can tell a lot. But I think the personal interaction is more important. You can see somebody on television or a picture or something, but that may not, that may not be real. It's that in-person aspect of it that gives you a sense about what's going on with that person.
It feels like there's some kind of energy, or I want to call it energy because I don't understand it, but it feels like there's something that you just sort of holistically pick up on in person that is different from Zoom.
Absolutely. That's why it's important to see when you don't feel well. You can see the doctor over the phone or via computer. So it's good, but it's not really, if it's easy to miss something. It's just like, I'm looking at you now. It's easy to miss that you don't normally see in person. And it just gives you a much, I don't know, a better sense. Well, even yourself, you meet people, and that process of meeting them in person tells you a lot in how you feel about them. It's how their body language is over. You just can't tell one picture or one little move. You have to look at them over time. Really can get a good answer. Plus, you have to be interested in it too. So, but
yeah, it's both the good observer,
anyway,
the intuitive, and the analyst, everything.
I always felt, and people used to get angry at me for it. I always felt that, look, the Office of Leadership Analysis, when it was abolished, I think was a big mistake, really big mistake, in my opinion. And I used to tell the head of the office at that point in time that, what you really need to do is make the office of the people part of it the most important. The leadership analysis folks very often would get more into the politics of it and stuff like that. And that's not going to give you a lot of, anybody can guess about the politics, but looking at how someone is going to react. What if this happens? What if that happens? How do you think that person's going to negotiate it or react or feel? What are his relationships with his family and stuff like that? And that gives you more of an ability to really predict the future.
Yeah, I agree.
Actually,
it was fun. I couldn't imagine a better job in the world.
it sounds amazing, and it makes me think, and I know we only have a few minutes, but it makes me think what an advantage it might be to have a female president when other countries clearly have similar units looking at leadership, and all their assumptions are based on how men work.
That's right. It's a very good point. Very good. I mean, how many countries have had female? England has had leaders that were female.
Germany,
has.
England and Germany.
Germany.
Australia.
Has there been an Australian?
Oh, I mean, New Zealand, sorry. Whoops.
Yeah,
horrible.
New Zealand, but not
Well,
Australia.
and looking at it from the other way,
India.
one of the few countries that hasn't is the United States.
Right.
Yep.
And so in some ways that kind of skews the opinions of the politicians in the United States because they're not familiar themselves with having women, females in the political arena to deal with. And I think that's important.
Israel.
It is a different way of thinking, and whether it's empathy or not empathy or all a range of things, that women are different than men are from men in that sense. And you need to get that. I don't think the United States has enough experience dealing with female politicians to really understand what the right thing to do is very often.
And it might be very advantageous because of that.
I think, yeah, I agree, absolutely. Absolutely. So,
yeah. Wow.
but
Well,
people get
Les.
angry at me because they say, well, oh no, you go against the grain of a lot of people. This is the way it's always been. This is the way it should be. Not right. Not right.
Yeah. So Les, I know you're have gotten older, as we all have. Do you have any advice from your perspective as a doctor about aging well? I, for example, I declare myself to not be anti-aging. I am for aging. I want to age because that's better than any alternative I can think of.
Yeah, that's right. You have no there is no alternative.
There is no alternative. So I'm pro-aging, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of things you should do. The problem is doing it. And I know myself, there are things I should be doing and I don't do. Yes, you have to have a good diet. Personally, I don't eat meat. I eat fish and I'm vegetarian and I eat fish. But that's it. I don't eat meat because it's bad for you. They know it. We know it's bad. So I don't do that. I don't exercise as much as I should, and you need to take a walk, go exercise, or whatever. I have the best intentions. I never seem to getting around to doing that as much exercise as I like to do. Anyway, I could tell you more stories about my adventures overseas, but there's no time. If you want, whatever you want, I can tell stories forever about assets that we've had that behave certain ways that, it's just kind of crazy. I just tell this one, and then I'm going to shut up. We had an agent in a Scandinavian country that got very friendly with a female asset. And they worked well together, and it was really good. And then he got called back to Washington for another assignment. In the meanwhile, this asset really liked him, and she was very devastated that he wouldn't be staying there. And she went a little off the wall, suddenly going around her office and saying, I'm a spy. I spied. I'm a spy, etc. And what did her boss do? They sent her to the hospital, to the psych unit, because they thought she was crazy. And in the meanwhile, our employee wanted to go visit her in the hospital because he felt very bad for her. I got him. And so I had to go and placate him and tell him, no, you shouldn't really do this. And also have a little chat with the asset involved and calm her down a little bit. And luckily I was able to do some of that, and it kind of worked its way out. But here's this, suddenly you have it, and literally in the whole, I'm a spy, I'm an American spy, etc., etc. And it's like, and I got this hysterical call from the chief of station, get here quick. And that was one of the more different situations. But there's a whole, I could just go on.
Oh my God.
Anyway.
Oh, well.
People are quirky. People are quirky for sure.
But it's a real, it's in my opinion, it's sort of a medical specialty, even doing leadership analysis from a medical psych perspective. I don't think we do enough of it in terms of the people who are employed. They're usually, in my day anyway, I have no idea what it is now. But there was small units, and there's only so much you could do, and the other units were so much bigger that the political aspects of it took over everything rather than
there's a real it's a rational world bias out there among analysts.
Yeah,
and
I understand.
And I mean, I just last week I was in a discussion about that with somebody where I was making that point. For example, analysts love to read The Economist. And I actually dislike The Economist. I find it incredibly boring.
It's also wrong so much of the time.
Because the whole bias of The Economist, it's a rational world. If we just figure out the facts, we can make the right decision. And, my experience is that's not how life works. That's not how leadership works. There's,
right.
There's not a whole lot that works that way.
That's a fantasy.
It's a fantasy.
I understand the fantasy, because if it were a rational world, it would be a lot easier to understand, and you would feel accomplished because you could understand it. But the thing is, you're better off.
It surprised me how many analysts, leadership people from the Office of Leadership Analysis would come up and tell me, I'm really good, and I've never taken a course in psychology, not even in college, and you kind of think, not even Psych 1, they get a little bit of an understanding of what makes, aren't they interested in what makes them tick? I mean, I just don't,
Yeah.
it's just foreign to me, but what can I say?
Yeah.
All right, Les, well, we've kept you for, well over an hour.
Well, thank you.
You were
Thank you.
as delightful as I knew you would be.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed talking to you guys too.